Good evening, everyone. Welcome to SANE's recovery webinar for the month of March. I'm Brendan O'Connell and I'm your host tonight. I'm standing in for the amazing Jackie, and I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully everybody can see that. So tonight we're having a webinar called The Big Five in Mental Health. So this is something that's been in the works for a while with us. We're joined by Professor Nick Titov, which I will give you an introduction to in a minute. But this is something that SANE has been really keen to get to our community or to give our community a chance to listen to. So we've seen Professor Nick present a few times across the organisation, and we were very keen to get that to you as soon as we could. So welcome tonight. I'd like to start by acknowledging that we're on the land of the Wurundjeri people I'm on, so in Melbourne. Please feel free to try the chat and share where you're coming from, but we recognise that sovereignty was never ceded, that it always was and always will be Aboriginal land, and we pay our respects to the elders past and present and anyone joining us today. At SANE, we also recognise that lived experience lives here. So we like to acknowledge that where we are today is not by accident. It's by the hard work of a lot of individuals who were brave enough to stand up and stand out, and their families and communities that got behind them. And, you know, those people who are brave enough to fight for people that have been lost to us, and those people who have fought while fighting other battles. But they all have brought sort of a unique understanding and a unique benefit to what we know today about mental health, and how we are able to work in the kind of organisations like SANE and MindSpot that work towards finding, you know, solutions for people who need them. So I have to go through a bit of housekeeping, as we always do. I know Jackie does this beautifully, but I'm going to do my best. Today we're joined not only by Professor Nick, but also by Jinx, who's one of our forums moderators. And Jinx will be making sure that anyone who needs some help or has a question is able to get that support live as the webinar goes on, so that you don't have to worry about missing out on anything. But also to help, I guess, in case there's any content that comes up or things that come up that might need some moderation support. So using Zoom tonight, you've got the chat function there, which you're welcome to use, and I can see people are already getting that going, which is great. And we're having a little bit of trouble with names in the chat. Hold on 1 second. I do have you as a panelist, Jinx. Hopefully I'm not sure what else I might have to do. So I'll get through this bit and then I'll play with that. I do apologise. So maybe just avoid the chat until we get Jinx the right controls. So you can either send to hosts and panelists, or you can send to everyone when you make a chat. So it's up to you. If you just want to raise maybe a question for the host, for Professor Nick or myself, then you can send it to the panelists. But if you want to talk to everyone, you can send it to everyone. We also have a Q&A function, which will give you the chance to lodge questions that we can address at the end of the presentation, and reactions, which will send hearts or applause or happy faces if there's something that resonates with you, and it's often a way we use to share our support for each other as well. There's also captions in case you need them, so you can click on that down the bottom. So please don't share graphic details tonight or anything that might cause other people distress, including things like substance use, abuse, suicide, medication names or dosages or eating disorders. And if you feel unsafe or need urgent help, please feel free to contact the numbers on the screen. Please don't share any specific personal details or information that could identify you, and please don't ask others to share these, including your full name, your workplace, your address, your phone number, or your email address. And please avoid any aggressive, offensive, or disrespectful words, and tone, and value other people's perspectives. Any discrimination based on gender, sexuality, cultural race, or religion, there's just no place for it here tonight. Moderators may remove messages that breach the guidelines. So on to our tonight's speaker, Professor Nick Titov. So Nick is a professor of psychology at Macquarie University, has been involved in more than 100 clinical trials of psychological interventions, founding executive of director of the Australian MindSpot and MindSpot GP clinics, and the current research interests including identifying the everyday actions people can take to support their own mental health. So Professor Nick is with me now. Professor Nick, what is it, I guess, that gets you up in the morning? What makes you go through 100 trials and still want to learn more?
Hi, Brendan. Hi, everybody. Thanks very much for having me. Really nice to be here. So I'm a bit unusual. I think I'm probably much like people here. We're passionate. We're passionate about trying to support each other. We've all had family members. We've all had our own challenges with mental health, and one of the big issues, of course, is access. Access not just to services, but access to good information. I'm a big supporter of SANE. I think what you guys do is amazing. I've been supporting you guys for many, many years, if not decades, because we need organisations like SANE. We need people who are prepared to drive and challenge dominant paradigms. So a lot of the work we've done, a lot of the research is really about trying to simplify, improve, reduce access barriers, and there's a lot of work to do. So the Big Five is part of that, and I'm happy to talk about that.
Yeah, great. We're really looking forward to it. Do you want to try and get your screen up and make sure that all works?
I just need to, if you can stop sharing, I think I can start sharing.
There you go.
Fantastic. Okay. Brendan, can you just confirm that you can see that okay?
Certainly can. It's
Okay.
just coming up. Yeah. There you go.
Okay, fantastic. All right. Look, thanks again for having me here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the Big Five, which as you probably already have gleaned, is really a developmental framework, or it's a piece of work which we've been working through for quite a number of years. The results from all the work we've done with about 25,000 people are really, really very encouraging. And I'm sharing these results with as many groups as I can, because I think a lot of that information which I share is relevant to people, not just in Australia, but across the world. Now, I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which I'm joining you from today. I'm joining you from Perth, and I greet you from the land of the Whadjuk Noongar people here. Here in Perth, it's just after 4 o'clock in the afternoon, so you guys are in the future. So I know I have a future, and that makes me happy. But it's 39 degrees here. It's been very warm the last few days, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and also acknowledge any First Nations people joining us today. I'd also like to acknowledge people with lived experience of mental health challenges and their carers, but also the people who support people with lived experience as well. And I say that because I'm really aware that our workforce really struggles, and often they don't get the recognition which they need. I know we all want to give them as well. So a little bit about the or before I go into the big five, I want to acknowledge that it's a big piece of work, and it's never the I guess result of one person's work. In fact, we've had many people working over, oh gosh, almost 20 years thinking and working on this. We've had individuals, we've had funders, and now we have quite a number of collaborators. The Big Five's been translated into 10 languages. Every couple of days, literally, I'm getting requests from groups in different countries. So today was Singapore. Yesterday, I had a request from a group in Taiwan to translate the model and to start to use it. And I think that's really exciting. I'm happy to talk more about that. I won't go into my bio. I think all this has been covered. Probably what I would say though is I've always been driven, as I indicated before, to try to improve access to psychological services. And for the last 15 years or 20 years, I've done a lot of that work in the area of technology, using technology to reduce barriers to access or care. But increasingly, what I've become more passionate about is increasing knowledge about the kinds of things we can all do each day to promote our own mental health. And I'd like to introduce you to Charlie Bear, our border collie. He's now 4 years old. He's waiting outside the door for me for his evening walk, and he's part of my mental health as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share evidence about the Big Five, and really I'm inviting you to consider how you might use the Big Five to support your own mental well-being. I'm going to start off by providing some background which contextualizes the work. I'm going to talk about the scientific results to date, and then I'm going to talk about how you could consider using the Big Five in your life. But I'm going to draw on your own experiences as well, because I'm a big believer in shared experiences and shared learnings. And there'll be plenty of time for discussion and questions. And please don't feel you have to copy information from slides. I'm really happy to make that information available, and I can send that through to Brendan, who's welcome to circulate that later. But look, I don't want this to be much of a lecture, but because we're on Zoom, it kind of is. But I'm going to use Slido to try to get some engagement. And I'm going to ask you a number of questions, beginning with this one here. And that question is, do you know what you can do to look after your own mental health? Now, I'm going to ask you to go to slido.com, or you can use the QR code that you see on the screen here. Enter in the word sane when you're prompted to. And can I ask you to answer this question? Do you know what you can do do you know what you can do each day to look after your mental health? One would be, I have no idea. And five would be, I'm an expert. Okay, all right, here we go. Now, while you're answering this, can I invite you just to keep your phone or whatever device you're using handy, because as we go through the presentation, I'm going to ask you to make ratings. Okay, all right. So let's start to move on in a moment. So I got that as a 3.5. I'm just going to make a note of that, because I'm always curious about whether or not these talks are helpful, because I'm going to ask you the same question later. All right, onto our background now. I want you to think about your physical health for a moment and just reflect on the fact that we actually know quite a lot about the kinds of things we can do each day to improve or support our own physical health. And here are some examples. Brush your teeth twice a day, exercise 3 times a week, drink 8 glasses of water, walk 10,000 steps. Now, we all know that kind of advice. We may not follow it necessarily, but we do know it. Now, that advice is actually quite sticky from a cognitive perspective. And it's sticky because this kind of advice often has two parts. It has an action or a target behavior and a frequency. That is how often we should do something. Now, what's been interesting as we've gone through this journey, I guess, of learning, is recognizing that we actually don't have similar advice for mental health. We don't necessarily have actions and frequency. Having said that, there is some fantastic work out there, and there is some really good evidence that lots of different things can support our mental health. And there are some examples here. Now, we've reviewed these studies really carefully, and there are some limitations. Not to say that they're necessarily fatal limitations, but there are some limitations. And some of the limitations include that it's rare for studies to compare different actions, which means that it's not necessarily clear which out of all the actions we could do are most helpful. And likewise, the studies don't usually identify tipping points, that is, how often we should do them. Now, there are a number of implications from this, and that includes we don't actually have a really good sense of what is the most important things we could be doing for our mental health or how often we could or should do them. Now, our sense is that, and our thinking has been that if we can identify the most relevant actions for most people, and if you like, the frequency or how often we should do them, we could potentially develop new psychological interventions. But more importantly, we could develop mental health prevention or education campaigns to support the general public. So that leads to the work we've been doing in the Big Five in our studies. And by way of background, we've been working on this for, gosh, almost 20 years. Now, we've completed 6 studies in 2 countries to date. I think it's now about 25,000 people. And there are quite a few studies that have been conducted around the world as I speak by independent groups who are essentially replicating our results, which is really encouraging. These are the 6 studies which we've done so far. I'm happy to make these papers available, so please just email me or contact Brendan and I'll send them through to you. But I just wanted to make a point. We actually started in a very basic way. We started off with very simple cross-sectional studies. We then moved to a higher level of evidence from a scientific perspective, which were observational studies, and now we're conducting experimental studies. So we've really tried to be as thorough as we can and systematically answer basic questions and then test the reliability of results. So I won't go into the slide here, but we've been very specific with not just our scientific methodology, but also clinically how we can actually use these results in everyday care and ensure essentially the results are as reliable as possible. But look, can I say the first part of this presentation, probably the first 15 minutes, or maybe 12 minutes, if I can squeeze it in, is going to be heavy because I'm going to run through a summary of our methods and learnings. And I'm doing that because I want you to understand the science behind this before we talk about how to apply it. Because if you understand the science, you understand the limitations. You can work out what actually might apply to you. So can I ask you to buckle yourselves in because we're going to go pretty quickly. Now, the first study is the most complicated. I'm going to spend the most time on that, but again, I'll go through this quite quickly. This was our first study, and this was actually a cross-sectional survey which aimed to answer the 2 basic questions I mentioned before. Firstly, out of all the actions which we could take for our mental health, what are the most important actions? And secondly, how often should people do them? Now, the way we started this was as you would expect, we created a huge list of behaviors and action or behaviors and cognitions we call actions linked to mental health. Now, we reviewed a massive literature. I won't go into details. We consulted literally thousands of different consumers and health professionals across the country and in other countries. And as you'd expect, we identified a huge number, more than 500 different actions. So everything from kindness, gratitude, avoiding drugs, spending time with your dog, meditation, and so on and so on. What we did was we went through a process where we try to simplify the list, and we set some criteria about the actions which were of interest. And these were actions which people could do daily if they chose. They could measure them, that is, they could say how often they had done them, and that they were modifiable, which meant that people had control over how often they did them in the previous week. They didn't have to have any special equipment. Now, over time, we were able to reduce that list down to 96 actions, and here are some examples. Now, this list was 96 items, and I've just got a few examples here. Number 1, I kept a healthy daily routine, an example of a daily routine. Number 2, I did something to help others, an example of kindness. Number 3, I spent time doing something I believe in, an example of meaningful actions. So hopefully this gives you a sense of the really broad range of different kinds of actions which we had in this original list. What we then did was we gave this list to a community sample of Australian adults, more than 6,000 people. We asked them how often they did each of these actions in the previous week, the previous 7 days. But we also gave them clinically validated questionnaires about symptoms of depression, anxiety, their satisfaction with life, and we asked them lots of demographic questions as well. Now, we applied a number of different statistical models. In fact, our biostatistician literally spent a year and a half working through the massive data sets that we had. And what we did was we used a model of statistics called factor analytics. And what it does is it looks at the 96 different questions we asked people, and it clumps them into themes. And it came up and identified these 16 factors or themes. So number 1, meaningful activities. Number 5, social connections. Number 11, activities or tasks which are about challenging yourself. Number 14, gratitude, and so on. Now, the good news was that all of these factors had been previously identified as important for mental health. But we took our analyses a step further. We looked at the association between each factor, that is how often people did each of these factors, and their mental health. So we looked at actually how often people did something and what their mental health status was. And what we discovered, as you'd expect, was that all factors were important, but some were much more important than others. And we call these the big 5. These are the 5 at the top, which are in our big 5 checklist. Now, how important are they? How important are the big 5 compared to the others? Well, out of all of the 16 factors combined, what we found was that they accounted for about 41% of the symptoms of depression, and similarly for anxiety and conversely satisfaction with life. So all 16 factors accounted for about 40% of the difference in scores we saw between people. But the big 5 accounted for 37 of the 41%. So, well, truly, they were the big 5. Okay, so we'd identified, if you like, the key factors. The second question we asked was, how often should people do them? Is there a magic cutoff? And what we discovered was that actually there is. There is a really strong link between how often people do the big 5 and their mental health. Now, people who did the big 5 or more times each week, less than 2 times, 2 or fewer times each week, had poor mental health. So people who, if you like, weren't doing the big 5 very often had poor mental health as a rule. Whereas people who are doing the big 5 or more times a week had good mental health. Now, what we did then was we had to test the generalizability of the results. So we looked at the results based on different groups. So for example, gender, age, education, employment, whether someone reported they were Indigenous. And what we found was that the same patterns were important. The big 5 were important for all groups. Now, okay, let me summarize here. What we found using this cross-sectional data, which is a survey, was there were these big 5, which were, out of all the things people could do, the most important things. But the second thing we found was that frequency matters. Okay, all right. Now, that was study 1. That gave us, if you like, the big 5 checklist, which I think is appended somewhere to the chat, perhaps. And I'll come back to that in a moment. I'm going to quickly run through the other studies because I think they're important. Thank you, Brendan. Brendan's just posting that now. Now, the second study we conducted asked the basic question, do big 5 scores change during treatment? And the aim of this was to see whether scores on the big 5 improve as people's mental health improves. Now, this may seem like an obvious question, but what we discovered from the research is that lots of people run surveys, but those surveys are limited because they provide data about a point in time. Whereas if you can actually look over time, you can see with individuals whether these kinds of things actually matter. So what we did was we recruited more than 400 people who were troubled by symptoms of depression and anxiety. And these were people who we gave one of our online treatment courses, which we use at MindSpot. So this was a treatment course for symptoms of anxiety and depression. These were adults. Now, what you can see at the bottom of the graph here are their scores on measures of anxiety and depression. And what you can see is that over a period of 8 or 9 weeks, their symptoms reduced by about 40%, which is fantastic. What we're seeing is a nice effect. Now, what we did while people were receiving the treatment was we asked them to complete the Big 5 questionnaire, not as part of the treatment, but just as the standard set of questionnaires. And what we found was that as scores on symptoms of depression and anxiety reduced, scores on the Big 5 and all the 5 factors as part of it increased, and there was a very, very strong relationship. And what this data showed us was that there was a relationship between Big Five scores and mental health. Okay, all right, that's study 2. Now, study 3 and 4, I'll go through quite quickly. The aim of these studies were to actually see whether the results were replicable, that is, whether they would generalize or be repeated when we worked with a different population. So at MindSpot, we administered the Big Five to about 15,000 people. Now, what we found was exactly the same pattern of results. When people were in the healthy range, they were engaging in the Big Five frequently, here in orange. But as their symptoms of depression, anxiety, psychological distress went up, their scores on the Big Five went down, indicating that they weren't doing the Big Five very often. So we replicated our results from study 1 and study 2 with samples at MindSpot. And then we also invited colleagues from Canada to use the Big Five in their own clinic, and they replicated the results with another 1,500 people. So our conclusions at this point was that we could see all of this data starting to triangulate. There's a consistent linear relationship. It's pretty simple. Do more, feel better. Do less, feel worse. Okay. All right. Now, I'm going to move on to study 5 very briefly. Up until now, what we've just been doing is observing. We haven't been experimentally changing things. And one of the outstanding questions at this point in time was whether the results were spurious, whether improvements in mental health caused improvements in Big Five scores, or whether it was the opposite. What we did in study 5, which was an experiment, was we asked the basic question whether if you nudge Big Five actions, can you reduce symptoms in people who are troubled by symptoms of depression and anxiety? So what we did here, and I want to call out the great work by one of our postdocs, Madeline Bisbee, who ran this trial. We recruited just over 250 people who were troubled by symptoms of depression and anxiety. Now, this was only a 5-week study, but what we did was we randomly allocated people to either a treatment group or a control group. So the treatment group received information about the Big Five. And we basically just gave them a PowerPoint presentation which described why the Big Five are important and gave them examples. And then what we did for 4 weeks was we sent them daily SMS nudges. So at the bottom here, you can see an example here. Reach out to a friend today and ask them about their day. Be a listening ear and support them. Caring and sharing makes you stronger. Connections matter. So that maps on to the social connections component of the Big Five. And we gave them questionnaires to complete each week so we could track their progress. So that was the treatment group. The control group just had to complete weekly questionnaires. Now, here are the results. What was really interesting was that we saw a really big difference. Here's an indication of scores on the measure of depressive symptoms, the PHQ-9, and scores above 10 usually indicate that someone's at risk of meeting diagnostic criteria for major depressive disorder. You can see both groups here, the treatment group in blue and the control group in yellow, start off at pretty much the same place but end in different places. What we saw was a significant difference between groups during the trial. The treatment group had a 28% reduction in symptoms between week 1 and week 5. What was interesting was that at week 5, we stopped sending the SMS nudges, but they actually sustained the gains they'd made, which was fantastic, which indicated that some of the changes in behavior had become part of their daily routines. The control group made a 9% improvement. The between group effect size at post-treatment was 0.5. And that's bigger than what we see with antidepressant medication, which we thought was fantastic for a trial, which was really just about reminding people about the kinds of things which they can actually do each day to support their own well-being. So our conclusions at this point was increasing the Big Five using simple information and nudges can improve mental health. All right. You guys are doing really well. almost done with the download of information. I've got one more trial to share, and this one's really important. I'm replicating the study at the moment, but this is really quite a controversial and a very novel design because it actually asks a really important question we don't ask in mental health. There's lots of advice about things you can do. That is, do more of this, feel better. But it's rare to say, well, if you're feeling better and something should work, if you take it away, shouldn't you feel worse? Now, that's a good test of a psychological model. So what we did in this study here was we explored whether restricting the big five actions in healthy people affects mental health. Now, what we did was we recruited 12 healthy adults. So these are people without symptoms of depression and anxiety. And what we did was we asked them to go through a 9-week study with us in 3 phases. In phase A, which lasted 2 weeks, we just monitored their activity levels on the big five and their mental well-being. In phase B, we asked them to restrict health and they did the big five. And in phase C, we asked them to resume health and they did the big five. Now, we measured the usual outcomes and here are the results. I'm going to go through them in a bit of detail. What you see here in blue are scores on the measure of depression. In orange, the scores on the measure of anxiety. And up here, this line here are scores on the big five. So the higher the score means the more people are doing the big five. Now I'm going to change the profile a wee bit to make the results a bit more meaningful. And instead of just showing the rough scores, what I'm going to do is categorize people down the bottom here into the levels of severity, if you like, on the measure of depression. So we had 12 people. And at baseline, at phase A, what we saw was that all 12 people fell either into the no symptom range or very mild symptom range. So here you can see low level of symptoms and people are engaged in the big five. Now, in phase B, we asked people to restrict health and they did the big five. And what you can see is a massive reduction in health and people did the big five. But importantly, you could see that people actually shifted their category of severity. So by the end of the restriction phase, only 4 of the 12 were in the no symptom range. People had moved into either the mild or the moderate range. And the moderate range is above the clinical cutoff. So arguably what we were seeing was that people were starting to slip into depression or a type of depression after 2 weeks of restricting their actions. Now think about the last time you became physically unwell or you had a change of routine which stopped you doing your usual activities. Usually we have a buffer of about a week or so where we can manage that. But if that restriction goes on too long, there is an effect on our mental health. And this is what we saw here, a significant effect. Now, what we then did in phase C was we asked people to resume those big five activities and we saw symptoms return to baseline. Now, what was important was that this is the first study, I think, that we've seen ever where someone has actually asked people to restrict actions which are going to be good for their mental health. But by doing so, demonstrating that those actions are really important and we can reverse, if you like, that decline by getting people to do those actions later. Now, a couple of key points from that trial. We saw that people deteriorated really rapidly. The rate of deterioration depended on how much people restricted. So the more they restricted, the more likely they were to deteriorate. But a really important key message here, which I think we all recognize in our own mental health and in the mental health journeys of our loved ones, is that recovery takes longer. On average, it took a week and a half, if not 1.5 to twice as long to recover as it did to deteriorate. Now, I'm currently testing these results in a randomized controlled trial, and I can tell you the results have been replicated almost exactly. So we're starting to get some pretty strong evidence. All right, I've dumped a lot of information at you. Let me just quickly bring all of that together. Okay, so in our studies with over 20,000 people, we've found that out of all the actions linked to mental health, the big five have the strongest relationship. There seems to be a cutoff for good mental health, which is doing the big five about 3 to 4 days a week. Now, it depends on individuals, of course, and this isn't prescriptive, but what we're seeing is that the big five are relevant to most people, regardless of demographics. What we're also seeing is that if people can increase the big five, they can improve their mental health. But likewise, if they restrict the big five, it can actually trigger symptoms of depression and anxiety. Now, there is an overall principle here, and that is do more, feel better, do less, feel worse. And our thinking really is that the Big Five is a simple framework for just reminding all of us about the things we could be doing to maintain good mental well-being. But now what I want to do is move to the real part of this discussion, which is actually how to use the Big Five in everyday life. And thank you very much to Brendan, who's posted a link to the Big Five checklist. This is a really simple checklist, which asks a number of questions, 15 questions. You can see the 5 domains on the left-hand side of the Big Five. And what we ask you to do is just go through in your own time and answer the questions. And it's a very simple traffic light scoring model. If you're in the green, good for you. If you're in the amber, hey, that's okay, but maybe you might want to look at whether you can increase any of those actions. If you're in the red, look, our results from a lot of people indicate that you probably want to pay some attention to that. And the reality is, of course, we all forget to do these things. My weakness is always social connections. I get too busy and I don't do enough of that. And when I'm under pressure, my healthy thinking struggles a wee bit. And so I have a reminder in my diary once a month just to check my Big Five. And that's enough of a nudge just for me to get myself back on track. But what I want to do now is I want to go through these 5 domains: meaningful activities, healthy routines, goals and plans, healthy thinking, and social connections, and actually talk a little bit about what you guys do. I'm going to run through pretty quickly because I do want to leave some time for questions. But what I want to do is just quickly explain what I mean by each of these domains, each of these areas, and to give you a sense of what I think they mean, but also what literally thousands of people have told me. So meaningful activities are actions which give us a sense of accomplishment, satisfaction, or joy. These are things which, we lose ourselves in. Now, they don't have to be complex things. They could be really, really simple things. And a key message, and I can't emphasize this enough, is that they have to be meaningful to you, not to anybody else. If you want a game, you game. If you want to dig a hole in the garden and you love that, go ahead and do that. It's got to be meaningful to you. And here are some examples. As I say, they don't have to be complex things. They could be really small, simple things which you do each day. Like just remembering to listen to a favorite piece of music once a day is kind of enough to tick that part of the checklist. But I've got a question for you guys, and that is, what are your meaningful activities? So can I invite you guys to go back to Slido and enter in again the same hashtag. And can I ask you to tell and share what you love to do? What gives you joy? What gives you satisfaction? What do you look forward to each day or at the end of the week? What do you do for yourself? Fantastic. Beautiful. Yoga, gardening, listening to music, right. Playing an instrument, listen to music, listening to podcasts, dancing, helping others, pet my dog. Fantastic. Gardening, hug my son, phone call to my mum, paint by numbers. Now, this is really important, and I'm happy to share these results later because really, really encourage people to learn from each other. Now, one of the things about meaningful activities is you don't have to do anything new. We often just forget when we're too busy the kinds of things which we used to love to do, and sometimes we just need to be prompted and reminded. So, look, in the interest of time, I'm going to move on. And again, look, Brendan, I'll share these results with you guys. And I should say, all of this is anonymous. I have no interest in knowing who anybody is, but I am interested in people sharing ideas. So, thanks very much for doing that. So, look, that's meaningful activities. Now, healthy routines. These are actually, can I say, what I think these are probably incredibly important and underrated as key things. And I've started to think of them as rituals. And these are essential and foundational activities which set us up for the day or week. And they're actually actions which we may not be aware of because we may be doing these automatically. And there's some examples here. But you can see that things like healthy sleep routines, eating well, being physically active, taking the dog for a walk, they're examples of things which we do physically or to look after our physical health. And can I say, having worked with many thousands of people, when people are struggling, These are often the first things I ask people to pay attention to. And 8 times out of 10, if not 9 times out of 10, these are the things people have started to slip on. And if these things aren't working well, other things aren't necessarily going to work. But there are other examples of healthy routines and rituals. For example, home admin, cleaning your home. These are actually really important things because they set us up in terms of our routines. Likewise, having a dinner time with family or friends, or even a phone call at dinner, if you're living by yourself with someone you care about, gives you a structure and it breaks up the day. And it's a time to actually recharge and refresh, but also taking breaks during the day, or taking longer vacations or breaks if you can. These are all examples of routines which, if you can build in to your routine and your rhythm, they're actually incredibly healthy and important. So back to Slido, everybody. I'm going to ask you, what are your healthy routines? What's your go-to? What's the number one thing which is really important for you in terms of staying well or keeping you well? Regular walking, exercise, being strict with sleep, excellent. Yep. Making my bed, walking around the lake, journaling, in bed by 10, fantastic. Morning swim, walk, exercise, being outside in nature, face masks, fantastic. Caring for my body, healthy eating. Okay, these are great examples, everybody. Well done. I hope you're for those of you who might be struggling, just learning from each other this is a fantastic way to do that. Okay, just a couple more and then we'll move on to the next of the big five. Okay, great ideas, everybody. Thank you very much. All right, now those were healthy routines. The next one I want to talk about are goals and plans. Now, these are important and people underestimate them, but they're important because they define our intentions for the future. This is really critical because when we're struggling with anxiety, depression, we're often starting to think about our current worries or our previous worries. We're looking at the past. Goals and plans actually shift our focus, and this is important because we start to look forward to things, which means it can help to keep us motivated and energized. And here are some examples. So the goals can be long term, but they don't have to be dramatic. When I'm helping people recover, I'll often say to them, okay, I want you to achieve 3 things tomorrow, which is get up by 9 o'clock, brush your teeth, and have some breakfast. So by 9 o'clock, they've done those 3 things and they're a winner. Now, for some people, that's really hard to do. But if you can actually just build slowly on those routines, or sorry, your goals and plans, then over time you're going to notice that your focus is actually becoming more energized. So, a question via Slido: what is one of your goals for 2025? Doesn't have to be grand. That better that it's not. What are you hoping to achieve this year? And again, learn from each other, everybody. Keep reading lots, great. I asked my daughter what one of her goals was for this year. She said, Dad, I'm going to read 24 books. This is from an 11-year-old. And I thought, oh, you're the best. You'll be fine. Learn a new language, get a job, take each day as it comes. Getting on top of my business admin, great. Get my driver's license, lose weight, improve my health, finish the first year of degree, fantastic. And of course, with goals and plans, as you know, really important to write these down, pop them into your calendar as a recurring thing. So every time you open your calendar, even if you don't read it, you're actually going to subliminally read it and it starts to encode and it focuses your attention on, okay, I'm moving forward, which again reminds you not to be focusing on necessarily the stuff that we can't do too much about, which might be painful, but which may not be helping us move forward. Okay. Again, in the interest of time, I'm going to move on. This is excellent. Great work, everybody. Now, healthy thinking, I'm going to go through this one quite quickly because I presume everybody is well across cognitive skills and things, but just a bit of a refresher. As we all know, thoughts are the things we say in our head. They're in our internal dialogue. When we're feeling down, when we're starting to struggle with feeling overwhelmed, our thoughts sometimes become unhealthy, become self-critical, and they become automatic, which is nasty because we may not actually be aware of them. What can also happen, of course, we reach a tipping point, we can start to even become disrespectful towards ourselves. So what the heck does healthy thinking look like? Well, having spoken to thousands of people, got their advice, um, there are a couple of key points which people keep reminding us of, and that is, for them, healthy thinking is about accepting that things aren't perfect, which means that they don't have to be perfect. Our friends and family don't have to be perfect. If someone's late, then that's actually okay. Keep things in perspective when things go wrong. So avoiding the catastrophizing and acknowledging actually that, things do go wrong. What we have to do is actually be able to roll with it. And this last one is probably, if I could tattoo something on my arm and remind myself of this every day, this is what I would do, but my wife won't let me. And that is talking to and treating ourselves with the respect we would treat others. This is really, really critical. Now, I'm not going to ask for any examples around healthy thinking. I have some examples which I was going to show you, but I'm happy to share them via the slides. But in the interest of time and knowing you guys know a lot of this, we'll move on. But probably the key point here is that healthy thinking is about keeping a balanced perspective in challenging situations. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to move on to the last of the big five, which is social connections. And there's a nuance to this which I want to share. And of course, the preamble is we're social creatures, and we know that regular contact with people we love, people we respect, is actually really important. It's validating. It gives us a sense of connection and belonging. But this is the critical point. People have different social needs. It's not one size fits all. Nonetheless, when we're starting to isolate, um, people do forget who's in our social network. It's very easy for us to start to feel alone. But when we sometimes reflect, and people have reminded me of this a lot, and this is hence why I've included all of these examples here. But when we think about our social connections, sometimes it's about our immediate family, the people around us, the people who are closest, or our friends, or our colleagues. But it might actually be our great aunts, or it might be a work colleague, or a friend, or a neighbor, or someone in our social media network, or someone at the gym, or someone at the cafe we see and we say hi to on a regular basis. And what I want to do now is just recognize or really emphasize that it's important to stay connected, but you've got to choose your own way. For some people, it's face-to-face regular contact. My wife likes to talk to people every day as much as possible during the day, and that's fantastic. I don't. I'm happy to SMS buddies 3 times a week or twice a week, and that's enough for me. What you have to do is figure out what your needs are. So what I want to do is just use this as an opportunity to remind you guys, or get you to remind each other about who you might be missing. And I think about this every so often, and who you want to connect to. And I do this because every so often I realize I haven't reached out to my sister, or my brother-in-law, or someone who used to be an acquaintance at work but has now become a friend, but I haven't seen for a while. And I just send them an SMS, and the SMS says, "Hey, I've been thinking about you, just hoping you're doing well." So can I invite you to think about someone who you haven't reached out to for a while, and pop their details here anonymously, of course, and maybe send them an SMS message. Okay, we've got family interstate. That's a good one. Out of mind, out of sight, but it's important to bring them back in, and SMS can do that really easily. My son, my brother, fantastic. Sisters, my parents, volunteer buddy. Friends I've withdrawn a lot in the past few years, yeah. And of course, the longer we don't have contact, the bigger the barriers are we build. And the reality is, when people hear from us, they actually often go, "Oh, I'm really glad you've reached out to me." We can sometimes create barriers. Sometimes they're there, but more often than not, they're not. So can I encourage you to take this opportunity to just make a note or SMS somebody now who you're missing, and just say, "Hi, thinking about you." Okay, thanks very much, everybody. Now I'm going to move on in the interest of time, so there's a few minutes for questions, and I apologize for talking so much. But let's start to summarize to some key points, if I may. Now, there are some tips for applying the Big Five. Use the checklist. We've got an online checklist you're welcome to use at mindspot.org.au. But a key point, if you're struggling, is, as I mentioned, don't feel you have to do everything or anything new. Just build on your strengths. And please don't go from zero to hero. If you're really struggling and you're not doing much at all, just do one thing tomorrow, one extra thing. And as soon as you've done that, consider yourself a winner. And then the next day, do another thing. Now, I say that because I've seen literally thousands of people recover, and they don't recover by going from 0 to 100%. They go from 0 to 1, 1 to 2, and after a couple of weeks, they've made enormous progress, but they've done it sustainably and they've built up their confidence. It's important just to redo the checklist every few days or every couple of weeks to start with until you're on a roll and you've started to build the habits around it. Also, a real key piece of advice is please don't overthink it. I'm a clinical psychologist, and frankly, I think we overthink too many things. People don't get better by living in their own heads. People get better by getting out and doing things, by being engaged and looking forward and moving forward. Now, you've got to choose your own path, and the Big Five really is about just a framework. Now, there are lots of materials, little video clips and journals and so on the MindSpot website under Big Five, which you're welcome to check out. And please share them with family and friends. There's no copyright on any of this. We're making this content freely available, literally to everybody around the world because we think it's important information. All right, lots of work happening. I won't go into the details. Health Directive adopted it here in Australia, and lots of other groups are as well. I mentioned the RCT we're running, testing that restriction paradigm I mentioned, and we're just replicating results. I've got lots of other trials planned, but I'm actually really keen to hear from other groups about how they want to use it. And I'm giving lots of talks like this pretty much every week just to share the information and ideas. But look, let's go back to the basics and summarize the key messages. In studies with more than 20,000 people, we've found that out of all the actions linked to mental health, the Big Five have the strongest relationship. There is a cutoff, depends on the individual, but it's around that midway point. Now, the key messages are increasing the Big Five when we're struggling can improve our mental health. But when we're well, restricting the Big Five can actually trigger symptoms. And I think this is a equally important, if not more important message. Think back to COVID days when we all went into lockdown. I think this data is showing why so many of us were struggling and why we're not going to do that again. Now, the Big Five are relevant to most people, regardless of demographics. I'm not pretending it's a panacea, but there's a strong signal. And the message is basically do more, feel better, do less, feel worse. And really, I'd like to propose it's a simple framework for promoting good mental health, and I hope it's helpful to you. So, look, I'm going to close by asking you to reflect on that question which I asked you earlier on, which is, do you know what you can do to look after your mental health? Again, on that 1 to 5 scale, and I'll see if I've succeeded in maybe helping remind you of some things. So, over to you guys. It's looking very promising. All right, just a couple more people, please. Fantastic. You're making me feel great, everybody. Hey, look, on that note, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take this opportunity and thank you all for your attention. I appreciate I've covered a lot of ground. I'm really happy to answer questions either now or offline. But look, I'll stop sharing my screen and hand across to Brendan for questions. And thanks again, everybody.
Oh, look, just outstanding, Nick. That was that was a million miles an hour for a full hour, and I feel like it's been 5 minutes, to be honest. It was a fantastic presentation, so thank you so much. Look, there are a couple of questions, probably longer than the 5 minutes we've got left, but maybe just on behalf of kind of the same community around complex mental health, can you just give us some idea about how the Big Five might interact with things or lifelong diagnoses or more complex diagnoses? Is there any evidence around that?
Yeah, there is. I've been speaking to quite a number of people across our different trials and across people who use MindSpot, and people with severe and complex needs or conditions are really special. They've got lots of strengths, which they often don't necessarily remember, particularly when they're struggling. But there's been lots of feedback I've received from people, which is out of all of the big five, the things which help, if you like, them to stay well for themselves, and we all know recovery means different things to different people, is about the healthy routines. It's about just actually going, okay, what are the 3 or 4 things I'm going to do each day or each week, which I know are actually good for me. They may not be the easiest things to do, and quite a number of people have shared with me that they actually struggle, particularly with the sleep, because the temptation is to go online late at night with their buddies, and then what happens is they start this conversation. They don't get off till 4 o'clock in the morning. The next day, next 2 days are written off. So it actually takes some discipline. But people are saying it's those particular components which can help them stay well. The other components, the big five, look, they seem to apply, but I think the healthy routines or rituals, as I mentioned before, is particularly strong.
Yeah, look, I can see that from having worked in a clubhouse in a place where routine and purpose were, two of the main drivers for people attending. Yeah. Hey, listen, everyone, there's been a lot of questions around the resources and the presentations. I'm proud to say that at the end of the recording, we will pop this back into the forum so that there will be a thread to carry on the discussion, to talk about how you're going with the Big Five. Nick's very generous with his time to saying, so if there's a lot of questions or one common question, I can definitely email it on to him, for him to return an answer on the forums. But also we'll be providing any slides or links to the checklist in case you missed it today. Look, I want to thank you all for coming. It's been a great turnout tonight. The chat has been non-stop, which is always fantastic. A lot of love for each other in there too, which is something we're very happy to see. Yeah. And thank you so much, Professor Nick. It's just been a real joy to listen to you and to hear, like, there's great evidence about doing some of the things I think that, generally we just think as things we do when we're well. And knowing that they're also a preventative factor is great as well. So my last question before I click off, which was a very good one: every day?
Every day.
Every day? The Big Five every day?
No, look, the trick I think really is to just make it part of our routine.
Yes.
And that's the thing. If we can build these healthy routines, they become automatic, and then they actually become those virtuous cycles. So initially, as you learn any new actions or habits, it takes a bit of work. But if you can do it for a week or two, you then go, oh, that was quite good. I really missed that. And then you build a little bit further until you find the right spot for you, the right level for you.
Fantastic. I think
Brendan,
that's a perfect note to end it.
can I take this opportunity to thank you, thank the
Absolutely.
community, thank Jinx for moderating as well. And look, really happy to take questions later, Brendan. But yeah, thanks for your attention, everybody, and all the very best, okay?
Good on you. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thanks, Brendan. Thanks, everyone.